So, hello and welcome to our Facebook Live. I'm Nick with Plum Dragon Herbs. Today we're joined with Plum Dragon's founder, Josh Walker, for a customer question and answer. So Josh, thank you for being here.
Thanks, appreciate it.
So Josh, before we begin, would you like to give a quick background about yourself and Plum Dragon?
Yeah, so real briefly, so Plum Dragon became a thing in the early 2000s. I had a bunch of friends who we were training, we were getting injured, and we needed some kind of solution. And I'd spent a number of years in college working with a guy who with a school that was real into the TCM stuff, and so I just kind of started making these liniments, and people liked them and they started buying them, and I just kind of threw up this website and kind of started running this thing out of the closet. And before I knew it, I was like making more than I could handle, and I eventually I just quit my engineering career and went to go run this. So that's how it all started.
That's awesome. That's a true entrepreneur story.
Yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah, so let's start by diving into the first question. So it's, which formula would you recommend for a 75-year-old woman with some osteoporosis and osteopenia? I am otherwise healthy, eat well, exercise daily, and I practice Tai Chi 5 days a week, Yang style short form. I have your Dit Da Jow formula and use it on my knees. So which formula would you recommend there?
So there's going to be a couple of kind of like mini questions that this individual can kind of answer for themselves. And the first is whether she feels like there's like a excess heat or cold. And and so if she can do that by kind of just playing with a couple formulas. And so if she puts on, for example, some Ho Family, which is ultra hot, and it seems to exacerbate the issue, then there's too much heat and she needs to go with something cooler. And then in that case, she's looking at a couple different things. People really like Bruise juice for that type of thing, even though it's not really meant. It's really meant for like serious bruising, but it's so cooling that it might be useful. But then because of the potential joint issues there, the Ancestors really seems like the better option. It's mildly cooling, but it's really good for that type of thing. And so then on the flip side, if she puts on the Bruise juice or the Ancestors and that cooling makes it feel tight, it's tighter, then she needs something hot like the Ho Family.
Awesome.
That's how she can kind of go about that. The other thing is, as at 75, certainly like the constitution of the body starts to become a concern. And so some kind of tonic might be really useful. And, she could go and get like a diagnosis, and then, Plum Dragon has like Great Mender, or not Great Mender, sorry, Gecko Tonic.
Right.
And Spring Wine might be a little, it can be a little difficult for people if their digestion isn't really like good. But something like Gecko Tonic might be or even, Four Gentlemen's or something might be a really good thing to throw in with that.
Awesome. No, thank you. That was definitely a great answer. So let's move on down to question 2, which is, what's the best alcohol to mix with the Dit Da Jow herb packs?
So this is kind of a cool question, because when I was doing a lot of R&D for Ancestors and a couple of these other formulas, there's actually a relatively good body of knowledge out there about solvents. Right. So water, of course, is like the universal solvent, and it's like pretty good at dissolving all kinds of stuff. And there was one study in particular that I don't even want to call it a study, because it's not like this is new information, right? Like we've been doing this type of thing for a long time. Alcohol that's like more than 95% pure is really good at extracting things that can't normally be extracted. The problem is that you don't want Jow that's 95% alcohol. Like that's too much. It's great for dissolving things, but it's not great for like application. And so that's where some of the kind of different cooking methods come in. If you're using, like, if you want to really cook stuff, like you could cook it in something like, or I'm sorry, cook it, like let it age in like some kind of pure grain alcohol for a while, half a gallon, and then add water to that to bring it down to like 40-ish%. And then continue letting it age. And that's a real common thing. And there's a reason, a scientific reason why that's very useful. In terms of final alcohol percentage, if you're doing like iron palm training, I actually like prefer my liniments to be like somewhere between 30 and 40%. So like you'd even cut vodka a little bit lower than that for iron palm liniments. And I prefer that like my injury liniments are like, 40 to 50%. So it also it just depends on what you're looking for, but that's for sure a good range.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you. So the next question is, can you tell us more about how to know which formula would be best to use for my iron palm practice? And almost more broadly, how do I choose the right formula?
All right. So we could probably do like a whole hour on this.
Oh, 100%.
So one thing for certain is you want to, like, and I don't mean to like go get all kind of like slightly philosophical on anybody, but like when you're like in high school and you like want to figure out what you're going to do with your life, right? Like some people are like, well, I'm going to go to college and I'm going to like study, science or history or whatever. And then they get out of college and they're like, okay, now what? Right. But like, if you're like forward thinking, you're like, I want to do this with my life. And then you go to college and you study that thing.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing here. Like you want to figure out what your objective is with your training. You want to figure out what type of medium you end up hitting for that objective, right? And so the reason that's important is that a lot of people are hitting a bag. They're hitting a closed bag that is, has iron shot in it or lead shot or steel shot or whatever people are using, right? And so if you're hitting a bag like that, you want something that's a strong blood mover, but it also needs to be really good at addressing the health of the joints.
Yeah.
So like all the wind damp herbs and all the like anti-rheumatic herbs and all that stuff is like really important for hitting the bag because it tends to like reverberate back into your hand and cause a lot of, vibration and stuff there. So in that case, you're looking at things like Ancestors, White Dragon if you're a little earlier on, and then the whole line of Kuyu Chung formulas like the Kuyu Chung and the Ark Wong and the Feminong and all that stuff have a lot of that stuff in it. And in the Feminong in particular is kind of cool because it's like got this huge quantity of Chung Huo in it, which is this great wind damp herb that's just awesome. On the flip side of the fence, there's this other crowd that's not as common, but are hitting open medium, right? And so not as much with sand, but like when people are hitting the iron ore, like the taconite, and like people who will know who've heard of this, like they know what I'm talking about, right? Like taconite is like they take this like iron ore, this iron, and they like make these pellets out of it. And so when they do that, they're hitting it directly, and so you get these like point hits on your hand, all these little like point contact hits. And so it doesn't hit the joints the same way. Like it's much harder on the skin. It's much harder on the kind of the muscle fascia, but it like doesn't get down to the joints the same way. And so for people who are hitting that, you actually want more of a bruise based liniment. Like you want, like, it doesn't mean you go out and use a Bruise Jow, but like Ho Family and Southern Fist and those kinds of liniments actually become more useful for that type of thing. Like you honestly, like using a Kuyu Chung doing that, like you're probably okay, but it's really, it just doesn't, like I tried using it, the Golden Lotus with that type of thing, like the coconut break formula. And those are like, they're so low in my opinion on like the strong blood movers that they just don't like. That was like the worst my hands ever felt is I think when I used like the coconut break type formulas, like those like Bach May, like type formulas on open medium, and I would just always walk away and my hands were like just so, they felt so stiff, like those. So you really want to match it like to the type of training that you're doing. So hopefully that answers the question.
That helps. And I guess as an extension of that question, can you tell us which formulas you really like to use for your own personal training?
Yeah, I love the Kuyu Chang formulas. The Ancestors is stronger than Kuyu Chang, and it's got this really kind of unique feel to it. But like all the Kuyu Chang based formulas, I love. And in fact, I meant to bring it in here. I have this like 3-gallon jug of the Phi Manong, which is actually really similar to the Kuyu Chang and the Arc Wang and all these other ones. I love the aroma. I love the feel. They're not as strong. I mean, they're really strong formulas. They're not. They don't treat you the same way that the Ancestors does. But those formulas for me, like I just love them to death. Like I was saying earlier that about the Golden Lotus and the coconut break formula and the Bok Fu Pai. I said Bok Mei earlier. The Bok Fu Pai formulas. I'm not saying they're not good formulas. A lot of people like them, but like those types of formulas for me, they just don't. I just can't get anything out of them. So for me, like Kuyu Chang style formulas are really great. And actually, the White Dragon is kind of like the level 2 White Dragon is kind of similar to the Kuyu Chang in that way. It's a different combination of herbs, but it works the same way.
Oh, awesome. Very, very, very cool. And then, so another question that we have here is, for those interested in making their own formulas from the herb packs at home, can you suggest any interesting modifications that can be made or that you've tried that others may want to try?
Yeah. And so some of this, some of the stuff kind of comes down to, like, if you want to get real deep into this idea, then the answer kind of becomes like, you have to learn the herbs, right? And then there's the materia medica. But, you know, I used to, like, if any of the people that, like, there's like about, I don't know, 30 or 40 people out there that have done like kind of formal herb training with me. And those people would be familiar with this term that, like, I have used, like, called the block design. Mm-hmm. You can actually go and you can take a formula and you can break that formula down into kind of these like modules, right? And you look them up, you look the herbs up and you see what they do. And you kind of take each herb and you break it into these categories, right? Mm-hmm. And then, you know, you kind of weight each of those herbs in each of the categories by how much they have in there or how strong they are, or, you know, both. And then you kind of look at the formula and you say, well, what is this formula doing and what do I want it to do? And so then the first thing there is, like, if it's doing something totally different than you want it to do, then you grab it, you pick another formula.
Yeah.
But then on the flip side, when you find a formula and you block it out into these categories, these bins, and you say, okay, this formula is doing the things I want it to do, then you can kind of go into that primary category, like that primary, you know, group of herbs that's really the primary function of the formula. And you just start experimenting, right? Like, you don't, like, some people are going to tell you, like, don't mess with it. Like, these are like, have been around for hundreds of years and like all of these things, like, forget that. Like, that, right. We're not talking about internal medicine. You're not going to hurt yourself by experimenting with throwing another herb in a formula. So you take these, you know, these categories and you go look it up. You go look up in the materia medica. Like, let's say it's mostly a blood invigorating formula. Like, you go in and you say, well, these are some other herbs that sound cool for blood invigoration. Like, I'm going to add some zhang huang, or like a big one. And this doesn't mean you go just add this to everything out there. Mm-hmm. Sanlung and Aju are like these two really, really strong blood moving herbs. And so a lot of really strong Jow formulas have those two herbs in them, you know, in a decent quantity. And so you just kind of say, well, I want more of this. And then, you know, you do that. And maybe, like, I have actually one of my good friends and students he makes new little jars of Jow all the time.
Oh, very cool.
And yeah, and he'll take all different manner of herbs and he'll just play with all different manner of stuff. And his his sort of thing is that he feels like sometimes if it's too blood moving, it tends to like detract from these other qualities.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't feel that as much, but he really does. And then so like sometimes you add too much of this and maybe it like feels too blood moving. So then you're like, well, I might pull that out and I might add something to this other thing to balance the formula out. And I think a lot of it is just that kind of experimentation. As long as you have like this basic idea, this basic understanding of what the formula does and what each of the herbs like categorically is performing, it becomes really not a difficult process to play around with it and make modifications with a book in front of you. And you don't have to be worried that you're going to hurt yourself. Like it's just some jow on your hands.
Exactly. So here's a question that we got from Instagram from Brian Williams.
Okay.
When you buy herb packs, how long do they have to age before they are ready to use?
That's a grayscale.
Mm-hmm.
When I like the very, very first bottle of jow I ever made, they were like, take these herbs and age them for a month and you're good to go. And then there was always this idea that the longer they age, the better, but they're like, you can use it after a month. So here's the thing. The jow, it's like a logarithmic scale, like it plateaus. So like when you first start aging it, it's not strong, but at the beginning it's like gets stronger really fast, right? And then it like plateaus off. So the idea there is that you could open a jow and use it after a couple months. It will be effective. It'll do things, but it won't be that strong. It won't be as strong as it could. And so you just use a little more of it, right? If needed. The advice I've always given everybody to make it kind of like cut and dry, the advice I've always given everybody is just give it 6 months. Like put it in the closet for 6 months. If you want to shake it or whatever, like do it, but like just give it 6 months and then start using it. And I think that's a pretty good guideline. I think that there aren't a lot of people out there that are going to, say that that's just definitely not long enough.
Right.
A year is better, but I mean, 6 months is good.
Exactly. Awesome. So here's another question that we have. So can you tell us how the internal tonic wines like Plum Dragon Dit Da Jow, Comprehensive Iron Palm Tonic, and Spring Wine can be used to enhance training or healing? And do you have a favorite internal formula? And if so, tell us why.
Yeah, so the internal stuff, there's kind of more categories of how internal stuff works. These are good questions. They're really good questions. You could go really in depth with this one. The internal stuff isn't just about like when you start talking about Dit Dan Wan, you're talking about healing, right? Like you're talking about how you're healing the body. And in that case, you could break it down into like, again, into blood movers and like stuff that kind of like works deeper, like wind damp, and works with the joints and the fascia and all that stuff. And inflammation and other things. But you can also break that down into like the tonics, right? Which is kind of the very opposite thing, right? Like rather than healing, you're promoting. The tonics are like, in kind of layman's terms, it's kind of like a vitamin that promotes a specific thing, right? Like we've got multivitamins and like, then you've got maybe a vitamin that really is for a specific use. And the idea there is that when you take like, for example, spring wine, it's a very strong tonic, but it's a general tonic. Like it's a qi tonic and it's a yang tonic and it's a yin tonic. And so you tend to be tonifying all of these things. And like when we talk about qi tonics, really in some ways we're talking about how your digestion, right? Like we're talking about like how good is your body at extracting nutrients and things from food and converting this stuff into ATP and all these other sorts of things. So it's almost like an energy thing. A part of it is immunity. Yang tends to be like your basal metabolic rate and like libido and all these other sorts of things. And so a general tonic is good for training because it tends to promote certain things. Like, for example, if you're doing iron palm, you're hitting the bones hard, right? And so what they say is that the Chinese like to say like that type of thing undermines the liver and the kidney. And so like you weaken the liver and the kidney, and we're not necessarily talking about like in a actual physical way, like your kidneys are, you know, going to go bad. That's the meridians, right? And they talk about the liver and the kidney being responsible for like the tendons and the bones. And so yang tonics tend to be really good at tonifying whatever, giving you whatever nutrients in your body you need to help keep not just keep the bones strong and the tendons strong, but help them grow and strengthen. And so that's, for me, that's like where a lot of that type of stuff becomes in handy. Like I don't personally feel a lot from the chi tonics, but the yang tonics. Sorry,
and not to interrupt at all, but ahead, so a little bit more on what a ketonic is.
Yeah, so like if we take a real simple example, like Four Gentlemen's, which is like you know, the big one. It's composed of these ingredients that, like when we say chi, like for me, we're really talking about like your body's ability to extract nutrients and energy or whatever from like your food, right? Mm-hmm. That's what it is. Like, and so in that kind of way, you're kind of getting energy from that, right? You're getting energy from how you digest your food and all of that stuff. And so there are people that, and the tonics are most useful for people that are either have issues with energy, or that have or training really, really, really hard, right? Like you just take a chi tonic and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I have so much energy. This is crazy.
Right.
It's when you have a deficiency, right? Deficiency either because, you know, of a lot of years of eating poorly or being in the wrong environment or conditions or whatever, or when you're training so hard that you tend towards deficiency, and then those chi tonics kind of bring you back to a homeostatic place. And it's the same way like with people like go in for testosterone, right? And so today the whole craze is like, oh I need my T levels higher, right? And it's not like there's a range, right? Where your testosterone should be in this range. And like as long as you're in that range, you're fine. Like if you go in and your testosterone is good and you like start taking testosterone, you know, creams or injections or whatever, like that doesn't mean things get better, right? Like the goal is the highest number you can get to. Like it's being inside this region where your body wants to operate. And so,
well, so this, you know, on that same vein, here's a question from Graydon McKee, which is, I'd like to know which jow is best for stimulating chi.
Okay, so when you say stimulating chi, the question is, the question I always want to ask back is like, what's the physical manifestation of that, right? So like in some ways, when people say that, maybe what they mean is like they want to bring, and the Chinese talk about chi flow and blood flow,
right?
Like these two things kind of operate in the same way, right? Like so you're really talking about bringing some kind of energy or something to with jow, at least to a certain part of the body. Right. So if what you really want is like, I want to feel like, you know, some people do qigong and they like their hands get hot and they feel that sensation, and like, don't get me wrong, like that's really cool, right? Like that's because I used to I don't do the qigong anymore, but like when I used to do the qigong pre-iron palm train exercises, like I wanted to feel that heat. I was like, this is so cool, like you know. So if that's the type of thing that you're looking for, then any jow that's a really, really strong blood mover is going to do it. So like actually Ho family is phenomenal for that because it's so hot. Like it draws so much energy into that hand that you start doing that directed qigong and like your hands get hot and your palms kind of get sweaty, and it's like, so yeah, so really, really hot moving jows are good for that type of thing.
Awesome. So here we're going to go to some other questions. We have two from Mark Mack. So the first is, I have just started iron palm training, self-directed learning, have purchased some of your IP liniment and book. I am doing daily IP training of 30 reps per hand that include front palm, back palm, finger claw strike, knife strike, knuckle strike, base of wrist strike. My question is, as a novice with IP training, how do I measure my progress? Regards, and Mark's in Australia, so shout out Australia.
So, ooh, Australia. So the thing is that when you want to measure, and I'm sorry again, like I always kind of get like a little bit philosophical about this, these questions. When you want to measure what your progress is, like you want to know what is your goal, what's your objective, right? And I get this from, I'll shout out to Dag Tabamina, who every time I do a session with him in the Philippines, he's, Josh, if you don't have an objective during your session, then you're wasting your time. And so for me, it's when you, what are you want to measure? Like, what do you consider progress? Like progress for a runner is like finishing a 5K more rapidly, right? But like progress for a weightlifter is like lifting more weight. And these two things they're perfectly valid goals that don't have anything to do with each other. And if the goal is strengthening the hand, right? If the goal is strengthening the hand, then what you want to do is you want to test a little bit, and you don't want to do it too much because you don't want to hurt yourself, but you want to test your hand on something, right? And whether that's a capstone or whether that means hitting the bag, like spending like, after you've done your warm up in your sessions, like hitting the bag 5 times harder and just gauging like the redness on your hand or like how it feels. Like that's one way to measure progress, is kind of seeing like how much conditioning do you think that you've gotten out of your hand?
Like a very physical way to measure that.
Yeah. And there's some subjectiveness in there, right? Because like, when you hit the bag in the beginning and you just hit it 10 times, your hand is all red. And then down the road, you hit the bag hard and you do it 100 times and it's not really red. So like, it's a little subjective, but like that's when you're talking about conditioning, that's an important way of looking at it. And actually, if you're hitting open medium, you'll notice the skin. Like the skin on the back of my hands used to get so thick and like leathery,
right?
Like the hairs would not even grow through it. Like you can tell that way too. If your goal is power generation, and for me, like this is the thing that really matters, right? Like, because the conditioning, like you guys have heard, I'm sure people who have listened to the blogs have heard me say, like when I'm training, like, and I get, and it doesn't really happen anymore, but when I used to get whacked with a stick, it didn't matter how much iron palm training I did. Like it was still just like, oh my God, my hand is messy. But if power generation is a thing, and that's like where I'm always looking at it, then you use breaks, you use blocks. You can start by taking a single block, but you don't even have to hit the single block. Like you can put the stack of paper on top. And this is a question, and we can come back. There was a discussion like 3 weeks ago about what paper does to your breaking. So we can revisit that if you want, but like you can start with like a stack of paper, like printer paper, and hit it. And like, that's your baseline, and hit it. And when you can break that block once, like a single block with a stack of paper, it's not that hard. Like if you get some power generation, it's not that bad. And
that sounds like, great advice that, somebody can do for, pretty cheap and at home.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not hard to do. And then once you can do that, take some paper off, and like maybe you take, depending on what, how you want your measurements to be, like maybe you just put a little paper on so that you're not so scared of like you're hurting your hand on the block.
Right.
And then once you can do that, you like just do the block by itself, and you got to get through that barrier. And then once you can do that, you do the same thing with 2 blocks, and you put the paper on top, and if you're right in that right zone, then the bottom block actually breaks before both blocks break.
Wow.
And then you reduce the paper and whatever, and then you get to this point where you're breaking 2 blocks, and you just go through that process. And then like for me, I didn't really care so much about breaking like lots and lots and lots of blocks. Like I was interested in like kind of veering off and like, well, what kind of interesting breaks can I do? Like, can I do it with a stick? Can I like do it with the back of my hand? Can I do the short throw? Can I do it like so that it looks really slow? Like I was more into that.
Yeah.
And so that
Well, and you know, I feel like, you know, even there, you know, going back to the question, you know, that would be a good way to measure the measured progress is, you know, different, you know, material used.
Right. Yeah, and you can do that.
Yeah.
Like there's all different. I have a friend I mentioned. So my friend Nate, who good friend, good student. He actually made this like impact gel, like or ballistics gel, and so like it's basically like I don't know what's in it, but like you can cure it. It's like almost like collagen or gelatin or something, and you can make ballistics gel and you can put it on top of the bricks, and it like makes it's a whole different kind of feel. But it becomes really easy to break a single block, and like, I mean, it falls apart. It doesn't last that long, but it's just about, in a lot of ways, it's really just about being creative and digging in and being like, well, what is this particular, how does this, you know, influence things, and how can I like steer it and make it a little bit easier, a little bit harder? And you can take that paper concept and you can do all kinds of different things with it. In fact, I even did it with Nate. I think we broke a whole bunch of pieces of wood. And so like in karate, right, they like to break boards. And so I bought a bunch of boards and we like lined them, you know, stacked them up and checked how many we could break there, and very different feel. A lot of people have probably seen the coupon blocks. They're like ultra cheap, and you can do things with those. There's all kinds of stuff.
Oh yeah, well this actually, you know, this really sounds like a blog that we should write of just different materials that we can use.
Right.
Here's Mark's next question. I've purchased your herbs to make at home using vodka, but in Australia the cheapest vodka is $32 US for just 700 milliliters. So as a cheaper option, is using mineral water a good alternative to vodka?
So interesting. This is kind of like our first question, right? Or one of our first questions. Mineral water. So water in general is, like we said, like it's like the universal solvent. It doesn't work as well as water and alcohol. It doesn't work as well. So you can use it, but it's not going to turn out the same way. Like it won't.
I guess to word Mark's question a little differently, is paying the $32 worth, you know, getting that much better of a final product than using the mineral water?
I think so. I think so, and here's why. So when you make, if you bought like a gallon herb pack, and even if you used like 1/2 gallon of the alcohol, and you ended up with something that was like low 20s%, because you're going to use 1/2 gallon, and then you've got the herbs in less than 1/2 gallon of water, so you're actually somewhere in the 20, maybe even mid 20s. You're going to get a lot of benefit there. And like if you've got an herb pack that's, you know, $40 or $50, and you add 30 to that, or 35 to whatever, and you end up in the 80s. I mean, you've still got a gallon of Jow for $80. And a gallon of Jow is something that lasts a really long time. I've seen, it's something that you can do. I don't want to like say that you should do this, because there's some people that really don't like this. And I mean, I don't care that they don't like it, but it's a controversial thing, is some people are using a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. So what you could do is you could use the ethyl alcohol, and you could just supplement it with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol to bring that percentage up. Now, they're different kind of alcohols and they work differently, but in some ways that's a good thing. Right. So it really just depends. I suppose if like money is really, really tight, you could take that and you could stretch it a little bit. You could cook it. Another option is you can cook it in some water, you know, a low simmer for an hour or two, like almost like a decoction. And then you add a little bit of alcohol, and maybe you use your $35 thing of alcohol for for 2 gallons worth or something like that. You could stretch
Right.
it. It's a really good idea to have some alcohol in there.
Awesome. Thank you. And thank you, Mark, for those questions. So our next question is from Carol Shapiro. She says, any advice on how to find a first-class practitioner of Chinese medicine and acupuncture? And she's in New York City.
Okay. So there's a lot of stuff in New York City.
Right.
I think Google's your friend.
Mm-hmm.
For New York City's got tons of stuff. I think Google's good. I think that, there's some educational facilities there that might be worth checking. I also think, surprisingly, you can actually get some pretty decent recommendations from martial arts schools.
Cool. Yeah, that's a great tip.
There's a ton of martial artists in New York City that either are also acupuncturists and herbalists, or are very good friends with that whole community.
Yeah.
It's New York City's
a close community.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And like, as many people are in New York City, it's a small pond up there. So,
right.
Aside from Google, I think that, talking to martial arts schools and the TCM kind of educational facilities is a really good bet. Yeah.
Awesome. And so here's the next question. It's from Diana Rowick. Actually, real fast. So back to Carol's question: is Camwow in New York City?
Camwow, I think they are. I think they are in New York City. And like, there's a lot of affiliation with that. In terms of like people that get involved with it, and they're a serious place, and they like, they're more than like, as somebody that, sold herbs and Jow, like Camwow is like the place where, you can go to get some of your stuff wholesale.
Right.
But they're a big facility, and they've got people there doing all kinds of stuff. So, that they certainly, and it's not like you go in there and, okay, who's your acupuncturist? Like, you'd go there and they'd give you a recommendation.
Exactly. So ultimately, Carol's best bet is just to really start becoming active within the overall community.
Yeah. That would be, that definitely falls under the category of places to check.
No, but awesome. So our next question is from Diana Rowick. I hope I said your last name properly. Do you have a product of which to rebuild bones and joints? So,
being with the caveat that we want to kind of be careful, I think, about that term rebuild. There are, coincidentally, there are, like surgeries, right, where people get like bone, like there's been broken bones and all these sorts of cartilage missing and all this, and like it's I'm not sure exactly what the studies are saying right now about like quote unquote rebuilding. With that said, the tonics, like we were talking about earlier, like the yang tonics especially, are really useful for kind of strengthening that bone. And so there's a couple different avenues to kind of take this down. And one is that as you age, your bone, you kind of lose like your bone is kind of like at the microscopic level is almost like foam, right? Yeah. As you age, that foam like loses density, and a lot of older people, like, you fall and you break a hip, and like that's kind of the end, right? And it breaks a lot of time because it's become brittle and it's less dense. So the yang tonics can be really good at kind of helping, maintain strong bones and tendons. And so that piece of it is an important piece of the puzzle. The other piece that's important is that you don't just kind of want to take these herbs and just kind of like be like, well, that's it, right? There's a lot of things that you can do depending on the situation, right? Like, this might not apply to everybody, but there's a lot of things you can do to help spur that process. And what I mean is, like, for example, weightlifting. And I'm not suggesting everybody goes out and like, lifts heavy and, doing Olympic lifting, but like weightlifting is actually really effective for, helping your bones to strengthen the bones. And so what you would do is you'd do something like weightlifting, and then you'd take a tonic, right? And you'd hope that there was like kind of this, like, you're hitting it from both sides, right? Like you're providing stimulation, which is, the body, that the only thing we can do as humans really is adapt, so like we're adapting to a stimulus, and then we're using that tonic to help that process take place.
Awesome. And actually, to go off of this question, we have this Plum Dragon white paper, and it provides a lot of good information on bone health. And we're going to put that actually in the Facebook comment section. So if you're watching, you can find that there for further reading on that topic. So here's another question from Alan Lee Carter.
Okay.
After a jow is extracted, how long will it be potent? I know when it is brewing in the jars, the longer the stronger. Western herbalists say it remains its strength for about 2 to 3 years. Just wondering if Dit Da Jow is the same way.
Okay, so did he say at the beginning of that question, he said after it's cracked?
Extracted.
Oh, extracted. Okay. Yeah. So essentially the idea here is that once it's extracted, and we may want to kind of go over that question in just a second. We'll see if I answer with it. Once it's extracted, and it's never really like extracted 100%. Like if you like, we're talking about how it kind of tapers off, and if you really want to like analyze it from like this real kind of mathematical or scientific way, like there's always like a little tiny bit left in there. And that's why people are like, oh, this jow is 10 years old, and there's a big diminishing returns, but there's like always something in there. So now once it's extracted, and if I'm understanding the question, he's saying like, what's the lifetime?
I think it's not only lifetime, but like also if you keep it brewed in jars, if it's the longer, the stronger, when does that die off? And I guess when is max strength too?
Okay. So the idea is that when you early on, you gain potency very quickly. Mm-hmm. And then somewhere in the middle, from like 1 year to like a few years, you're gaining it fairly slowly. And after that jow's a few years old, you're gaining that potency like really, really, really slowly. And so the idea there is that it's never really stopping. It's just that like you're reaching at these little straws, right? So like the jow after at 2 months, maybe the jow is like more than twice as strong as it was at 1 month, right? Mm-hmm. And that slows down, right? So then like eventually it becomes linear, and it's like every day that passes, it's the same. And then by the time you get to a few years, you let it sit for a year, and it might gain like 2% potency, right? And then in like 8 years, it might be gaining like 1% potency, and then 0.5%. And it's like after 20 years, it might have gained like 0.001% potency. So I think for a lot of people, and especially thinking about the previous, like one of the few questions ago, is that thinking about the fact that you kind of want to balance between like, I don't want this stuff sitting in my closet for 10 years. And I want to use it, but I also like want to use it as fast as possible. Right. You're not going to get a lot after a couple of few years. Mm-hmm. Like just not going to get a lot. Most of the dissolution has already taken place. You can get more out of it, but it's probably not something that you feel the difference, right? Like it still feels the same way. It still has the same impact, the same effect. And like I've always told people, if you're using a jow and it's only like 3 or 4 months and you just have to use it, just use it a little bit more, right? Like we're talking about concentrations, right? So it's just a matter, like if it's like density, right? Like if you want to get like this certain dosage stuff, then, and you're using something that's less concentrated, well, then you just use a little bit more of it.
Awesome. So here are 2 more questions kind of, in this same area. So the first is, once the jow is poured off from the herbs into the bottle, does it start losing effectiveness at some point?
No, with a couple caveats, and
Uh-huh.
I want to chat about this because this is
Oh, yeah.
a fun topic. So it doesn't start losing potency. Like, it's just this stuff, and as long as you like keep it out of ultraviolet light and you keep it sealed without, so that it's not in contact with air, it's pretty much for the most part going to stay just the same as that it was when you poured the herbs off, or when you poured the liquid off of the herbs. There's a couple interesting things about this. And so like one of my ventures that I did after Plum Dragon was I like started opening this winery. Some people are, familiar with this whole thing. And so there's a really, really interesting kind of correlation between making Jow and making wine. And that is that there's this, there's this process, there's kind of this chemical and physical process taking place. Now, granted, with wine, it's being fermented and there's an organic process there too. But they've also found with Jow that like when these things are being extracted, that there are like new compounds that weren't necessarily present before, and there's some interaction and there's some stuff being, created and swapped and whatever. Well, when you make wine, you keep the temperature really low because there are certain chemical reactions that you don't want to have happen, right? Because that will spoil the flavor of the wine. Well, when you're making Jow, you don't care how it tastes. Right. And so even though a lot of people are saying things like, age your Jow in a cool, you hear this all the time. And I've never, ever heard anybody like question it, even to the smallest degree. It's store it in a cool, dry place while it ages. Well, like I'm always kind of the one to be like, cool, why? Like, why do you want to store it? Like, what are you afraid of? Like, it's not in contact with air, right? It's not in contact with UV light. What do you get out of storing it in a cool place? So here's the thing. When you store it in the cool place, you're actually, the activation energy of certain reactions is not, you don't have the activation energy necessary. So there's certain reactions that are not taking place. Right. You don't want those things to take place. In Jow, we might. And so actually, it's kind of an interesting thing that actually, if you're storing your Jow while it's aging in a warm, dry place, then it will age more quickly, and you will have enough activation energy in that system that some of those reactions that might not have taken place if you're storing in a cool, dry place can actually now take place. I know that kind of got off track, but there was a time when I did like a bunch of research on that, and yeah.
So real fast, so kind of going off of that, I'm curious, what would you say the biggest difference would be if you're storing your Jow in a cool environment versus storing it in a warm environment? Like,
so I guarantee you 100%, all other things equal, guaranteed, and when I say equal, I guess I also mean that like the Jow is not like exposed to air and UV light and whatever. Guaranteed your Jow over the course of 6 or 12 months will age faster in a warm, dry place than it will in a cool, dry place.
That's fascinating.
No doubt about it. There's no, and it'll turn out different. Because like I said, even if we're talking like 10 or 15 degrees difference, the activation energy of certain reactions that are taking place in there, they will take place 15 degrees higher, and they will not take place 15 degrees lower. Or, and I like, you could probably retire off of doing research on this, and I don't know what they all are, but there is no doubt that Jow comes out differently at significantly different temperatures. And by differently, I don't mean bad. I mean,
right. Yeah, that's fascinating. So here's somewhat of a loaded question for you. So if I purchased a pre-made bottle, how long will it last?
It's, there's not really a shelf life. That stuff's going to last a long, long, long time. Now, we had a question earlier about the guy who said the alcohol is expensive in Australia, and woo Australia. Oh, yeah. And so in that case, water-based Jows, like alcohol really does act in a lot of ways as a preservative. And so water and oil-based Jows tend to, they might not actually have the same shelf life, but assuming we're talking about an alcohol-based liniment, it's going to last like years and years and years. My mom, I give Jow to my mom, of course, and she's like got all these bottles of Jow sitting in her cupboard, and like sometimes we'll be over and I'm like, Mom, like, oh my God, like she's got like bottles from like 2007 and like the labels are like, you know, straight out of a time machine. I'm like, what the hell? Like, this is crazy. Awesome. And so that stuff is still good. Like, it's still, now I haven't seen those bottles in a couple of years, but like, it's still really, I mean, it's just fine. Now, once the bottle gets low and you've got a lot of oxidation, that tends to break things down. And eventually, you know, a Jow could turn into something, you know, weird that doesn't work well. Like some people talk about it vinegarizing and whatnot. And that doesn't necessarily mean that it's gone bad. But I mean, you know, if you've got a bottle of Jow that's been sitting half full or half empty in your cupboard for 10 or 15 years, like probably just go buy another bottle. But like you don't, otherwise, like you really don't need to worry about shelf life.
And the shelf life also pretty obviously depends on the usage and what you purchase the Jow for.
Exactly. Like some of the real high alcohol Jows, like I was mentioning, like I like my Bruise liniments to have higher alcohol. Those will tend to stay longer. I mean, you think about it, like the whiskey in your cupboard, like it can stay there pretty much indefinitely.
Oh yeah.
And meanwhile, you open a bottle of wine and 2 days later you're like, oh my God, this stuff is terrible. Like throw it out.
That's actually a great analogy. That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So here's a pretty interesting question. So this is from Herb actually. Do you have anything specifically made for fingertips? I type a great deal at my job.
I think I mentioned in the last podcast that there's this formula called the Dit Dan Nail Turn Black formula. And I've talked to some people who have used that for finger training and it works pretty well. The thing that you hear about finger training, they talk about like, having issues with, certain types of dexterity and whatnot. But my advice with the finger training is to use a Jow that's focused more towards bruising. If you feel like your fingers are getting like tight, like the joints, like your phalanges are getting tight and stuff, then you can, I would supplement with like a iron palm specific Jow. But for fingers specifically, something like iron palm based that's more on the bruising side, like the Nail Turn Black. Actually, Ho Family, I experimented with some finger training when I was training Southern Mantis like really heavily. And we had this like bag hung up, and I'm always like doing these finger strikes on the bag, and like I used all different kinds of Jows, and Ho Family worked really well for that. The Nail Turn Black formula works really well. There's an iron sand palm formula that's got like rusty nails and like vinegar. It's all got this weird stuff in it, and some people like it. I told you my friend Nate, he loves that stuff. I think that works pretty well too.
Awesome.
If you want to stay like mainstream about it, then you can't go wrong with like Ho Family or Southern Fist for that. And then, like I said, if your fingers feel tight, then use an iron palm Jow almost as the injury liniment before and after.
Very cool. So here's a really interesting, really unique question. So this is from Suzanne Lynch, who lives in Ireland. So she says, "Hi guys, I live in Ireland, so it's very expensive to ship your liquids. I was wondering if you can use granules to mix these formula, or do you have to use dried herbs? I am an acupuncturist and herbalist, but I also work with racehorses. The alcohol would cause blistering on their tendons very quickly. Could you use it to dilute for the same effect? I feel so deprived that I cannot have access to your products. Any suggestions?" So thank you.
I like this question because I have kind of a little bit of, not like it's a really entertaining story, but I have kind of a story.
It's interesting.
So the thing is that granules, we played around a number of years ago with making granule based Jows, and they just don't work that well. Like they just, I'm not sure, like maybe if you put like tons and tons and tons of granules in there, but they were just different. Like they just never felt like they were supposed to. And I tried it with like, with Jow, I tried it with vinegar, I tried it with water, I tried it with all these things, and I tried a bunch of different formulas, and it just never really like held up to like a well-aged Jow, like an infusion. And so with that in mind, there's two things. One, we also played a whole bunch with like Yow, like oil-based liniments, and balms and salves and stuff like that. And then you kind of get into like patches and poultices and plasters and all these other sorts of like things. And so the oil-based Jows, what I did find was like, you can find, there's some places out there that sell like some, like, the concentrated essential oils. And they sell all kinds of good stuff. And I did make this one. I was trying to market it at one point with this chiropractor because it's like really, really, really strong painkiller. But it was all oil based. It was using all these like essential oils, and then I did end up putting a few herbs in it. But like it was all oil based. So you can make basic oil based, some Dit Da Jow, like that, and that might work because you can cut it with your carrier oil at whatever percentage. But then the other cool thing here is that there used to be a guy, a vet, who used to buy, like, he probably bought a dozen half-gallon jars or 24 half-gallon jars a year. Like, I don't know if he's still a customer. I won't put his name out there or anything, but he bought all this stuff and he used it entirely on horses. Like the whole point, he used it. And so like this question is kind of cool because she's, using it on horses. And what he says that he used to do is he used to use it as a wash. And so he would let it age. And we kind of come back again to this whole potency thing, right? Like, actually, if you used it early, it wouldn't be as strong. And,
right.
Or if you used it later, you would just use less of it. And in his case, he would cut this wash with water, or I want to say that he even used like an Epsom salt bath or something. And like he would cut the Jow with the Epsom salt water.
Interesting.
And he would cut it 50-50. And he would use this stuff as a wash, like I think like almost all over the entire horse. And he did that for like years and years. I'd be surprised. I bet he's still a customer because he loved doing that. And so
that is fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple options there, given that it's hard to get stuff out to the island and
oh yeah, definitely. So here's a question about the flexibility. So tell us more about the flexibility. What are the benefits of using this tea, and where did the formula come from? So
this was like an old yoga formula. And when I came across it, like somebody in like some country had been using it and they like really loved it, and they're like, try this, and I got it, and it was like this simple little thing. Like it had zhang huang in it, and it had some mugua, which is like the quince fruit, which is like really common on some, islands and stuff. And it had some cinnamon. It had some cinnamon twig in it at the top. And, I took it and I was like, I tried it, and it was like, actually it was cool. Like I liked the way it tasted. That was the big thing. It tasted nice.
Yeah.
And, I mean, now, like turmeric tea is like the hottest thing since like sliced bread right now. So like it had a bunch of zhang huang in it, and which is yellow turmeric. And so I was like, well, this is great, but like, man, there's some stuff in there. Could be some really good other stuff in here. So like I threw in some bai shao, which is great for the liver, and some and slight blood mover, and then some gotong, which is like really good at relaxing the sinews. And I changed.
Say like the biggest benefits are of just using flexibility.
It's honestly, it's relaxation. Like when we talk about flexibility, but when we talk about flexibility, it's kind of, marketed for people who are trying to increase flexibility. Like actually the benefit there is really about relaxing the body. Like removing tension. And I don't just mean like physical, like removing tension, like free and easy wanderer style. Like,
Yeah.
say, like if you free and easy wanderer, for people who don't know, is like this patent formula that like we always joke, like if everybody took free and easy wanderer, like there'd be no road rage. Like everybody would be happy while they're driving down the street. So it really is a relaxative. I don't even know if that's a word. It's relaxing for.
Oh yeah, that works.
Yeah, I like making stuff up. So
oh yeah, that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So it's very relaxing, right, for people physically, mentally, and probably there's like a connection, right, between those two things. People who are like hypertensive tend to also be like really like tight people, right? So it's relaxing. It really does relax the body, and being able to increase the flexibility is just like a byproduct of that.
And I know even for a lot of our customers, they claim that it even helps them sleep. So that's
yeah.
So we have one more question about another one of our teas, and then we're going to dive a little bit into our top 3 best-selling products, and then we're going to wrap it up. So anybody watching right now would be a great time to ask any question you might have in the chat, because we'll probably be on for, I'd say, around 20 or so more minutes. So to dive into the next tea, so how is the Plum Dragon Chai Training tea helpful? When do you use it, and how do you make it?
So the Chai Training tea is, I ended up making that, and it's funny, it's the same kind of parallel with the wine and the Jow, and same with the flexibility pack, the flexibility. I love tea, and I'm always buying loose leaf tea, and I got real into chai for a while, and like I was doing this experimentation where I would take like black tea, and like I was taking a bunch of ding xiang, which is clove, and all these different herbs, and I was throwing them in, and I was simmering them, and I was adding milk, and I was trying to do this like really, and actually the way it started is my father-in-law was like, had tried some, and he was like, oh my God, like this is the best chai tea I've ever tasted, and so then it kind of became this thing where he was like, send me this tea, send it. And so then I would send him, the tea, and that's how it kind of started. It was more of a like, a culinary experience, I guess. And so then I started adding things to it. Like I started adding the cardamom to it, and other little things, because I was like, for me, when you look at like a lot of the iron palm jows, like everybody's like, oh my God, that smells really good, right? Like the aroma and the kind of like the Pavlov's dog thing that it does. Like that's like, for a lot of people, that's really important. The feeling that it gives in your hands, like it's not just being able to hit hard. It's like you want to experience like being alive. Like
it's like a mentality shift. It's like walking into like a different room almost.
Exactly. So the Chai Training tea became this idea of like, well, I want to like exhilarate I want to experience being a human.
Yeah.
And so then it's like, how can we take this stuff that tastes really good and kind of this traditional tea and like add some, things to it that give it some effect. And so in this case, like, like a lot of the hot stuff that's in there is really, really good at like, especially in the wintertime, like promoting heat, promoting yang. And it's like, I just love drinking it. Like every time I have students come over, like I always have my thing of tea. Like I've always got tea sitting around. Like
that's awesome. So really, it sounds like for both the flexibility and the chai training tea, really any and all of our customers could benefit from just having some. Really down to it.
Yeah, the cool part about both of those teas, a little bit less because the flexibility tea is harder to make. And we can come back to how to make it. I know that was part of the other question. But honestly, like these are all food grade herbs.
Right.
We're not talking about like some people like jump out of their seat when people talk about drinking spring wine because it's got some really pretty powerful stuff in it. And when we're talking about something like the chai tea, the chai training tea or the flexibility, these are food grade items, and just about anybody can drink this stuff. You don't even need to be like looking to increase your flexibility or to like use it for like they just taste good. You know? Like, actually just make them just a drink, and then go and do some stretching because it makes it fun, you know?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
So awesome. That's all great. So now we're going to dive in a bit to our top 3 best-selling formulas: Ho Family, Bruise Juice, and Ancestor's Advanced. So to start, what are the basic differences between Ho Family, Bruise Juice, and Ancestors?
All right. So Ho Family, and actually we were talking earlier about that block design methodology, and that's kind of a really good way of kind of like going through this. Like Ho Family is like, it's this humongous formula that has like all of this stuff in it. And I have no idea what the mindset was when they added all this stuff, like, you know, 100 years ago or 60 years ago or whenever they made the original, the Enfant. But the thing about Ho Family is, like, if you were to take the Ho Family formula and break it down using a block design methodology, then you end up with this formula that like actually has more structure in it than you think it does. But like it uses a ton of pepper. It uses, like, I mean, traditionally they were using African bird pepper, which actually is, I think the African bird pepper that like is used probably in there now and that I was using, it's like 130,000 Scoville heat units. So it's not like crazy hot. There's hotter pepper out there, and you could use it, but not that it's really necessary. But then it's got like it's got this huge amount of osha root, which is like the North American osha root is like, it's related to like chong chong, which is ligusticum. And that stuff is phenomenal. And so when you look at the huge concentrations there, you kind of get this idea that, okay, like it's this really, really pungent, hot, like kind of crazy, you know, spicy, but a little bit sweet formula. And so it's really, really good, tends to be really good for like general injuries, right? Like I mentioned before, I've used it for iron palm, just as a, you know, to see how it works, especially with hitting the open medium. It's really good for you know, joint issues, as long as the issue isn't like crazy amounts of inflammation. It's really like the serious injury formula.
No, I think that's like a great way to put it. So if that's kind of where Ho Family is, where does Bruise Juice and Ancestors Advanced fall in?
So Bruise Juice is kind of on the totally opposite side of the fence of Ho Family. It's one of the more cooling formulas out there, and it's very, very specific. Now, I know a lot of people use Bruise Juice for like overall inflammation and joint issues, and I've even heard some people say that like it's spelled J-I-U, and some people even said, well, it's spelled Jew like that because we use it in jiu-jitsu. It's not what it was meant. Like, actually, J-I-U was supposed to be like, you know, you've got your Mandarin and Cantonese, like Dit Da Jow and Dit Da Jow. And that was where that came from, actually. But people, as you see, people use it for all that. But really, the focused purpose of Bruise Juice was like, I was like, I'm going to make a liniment based on like a simpler liniment that is better than everything on the planet for dispelling bruising. And so you can feel it. Like in Bruise Juice, you get a humongous bruise, and like in 2 or 3 days, this massive bruise is totally, completely gone. But that doesn't mean it's healed, right? Like it's still sore and it still hurts, and you can feel there's still damage in there, but the bruising is a thing of the past. And so like, that's where it really shines, is that one specific purpose. But then the Ho Family would come in there and it would actually be better at the actual healing process itself.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so then the Ancestors ends up being, you know, kind of a dual use formula, depending on what you're looking for. It's a crazy strong iron palm formula. And that's where it's really, that's how it was produced, is like hardcore iron palm. advanced iron palm, like where you're really, really like pushing the body.
Right.
But then at the same time, a lot of people are using it in a way that kind of fits it in between Ho Family and Bruise Juice, in that it's a strong blood mover, but like it does a much better job of dealing with the joints, right? Sinew, tendon, the bones, and all that kind of connective tissue in there, that, you know, kind of keeping that stuff healthy.
Very cool. So, so one follow-up question about the three, and then we're going to dive into each individually for a little bit. So can the three of these be understood to work on a continuum with the phases of injury?
With the phases of what?
Like with the phases of an injury. Like could you like start, beginning, end, or something to that effect?
Yeah, actually they can. With some, you know, small caveats, but you know, there's kind of two philosophies, and one philosophy is that at the beginning of an injury, it's inflamed and swollen, so use something cooling, right? But then the other tendency there is like, well, use something hot because you want to push all that stuff out and move it through and whatever. Regardless of what side of the fence you sit on, like we can like let people war and battle over that, but like regardless of what side of that fence you sit on, there's a continuum that you can go down, right? And so, so you start, and for me, at the very, very beginning of the injury, I prefer, especially if it's like bruised or inflamed or swollen and it's tight and all this sorts of stuff, I'll use bruise juice. And I will like get the bruise juice on there, and I will make sure that the bruising is like not the thing that's impeding the healing process. And then once the bruising's gone, it's on to Ho Family, right? And like then it kind of like can branch off there a little bit, in the sense that, well, if I feel like it's more in the muscle, then maybe I'm going towards Ho Family. And if it's more in the like the joints and the bones and it's deep, then maybe I'm going towards Ancestors. And you can take that same path the other direction. If you prefer to start hot with Ho Family, you can, and then once it kind of gets better, you can veer off in either direction based on the usage. For me, I always start with cooling first.
No, that's fascinating, and it's cool to see how they all work together.
Yeah.
So let's dive into Ho Family specifically. So what would you say the best uses are for that formula? So if somebody came to you and said, I am dealing with X, I want Ho Family, what would that X be? Well,
so probably the thing that people are physically attaching to for that is pain. People are like, they got hurt, they have like low range of motion, it's painful, it's swollen, they like need to get past that. And the Ho Family is great for like, you know, helping reduce the pain and kind of getting the range of motion back there. It's really, really good for that. Of course, it's great for all kinds of other things. A lot of people use it for like, you know, tendonitis types of stuff and bruising and all this. But actually, what it really, really is good for is like especially dealing with like the you know, the branch of the problem, like the symptoms.
Right.
And then of course it's a really good healing liniment too. It's like I mentioned earlier, like it's such a good general use formula. It hits all of these other things, but like it's just really good at like jump starting that whole process of getting you healed.
Oh, definitely. And so how would a practitioner know when the use of this formula is indicated?
So a practitioner is going to say, do I have excess or do I have deficiency? Do I have heat? Do I have cold? Is there wind, damp? These are the sorts of things that are going to go through the practitioner's mind. And so the practitioner is going to look at it and he's going to say, like, if we want to be like really about the book and like kind of robotic, right? And not terribly organic, we're going to say something like, okay, like you almost like have this, like this tree, like this, like diagram of if-thens, right? And like, okay, is the injury, you know, is there a deficiency or is there like excess cold or something, right? Okay, yes, use that, right? Is there pain? Yes, use that. Like, is it like a surface thing, or are we talking about like something really deep, like injury, like deep, or some kind of rheumatic, you know, sort of issue? if there's not, then yes, use that. Like those are the kinds of questions that a practitioner is going to answer.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you want to insert the organicness into it, then he's going to use his experience and he's going to say, well, yeah, there's a lot of heat in here, but it's not like tons and tons. It's not like crazy amounts of heat. There's a little bit of swelling, but there's some range of motion that's gone, and the extra heat won't be so bad for the swelling, and it's really going to help the range of motion and the bruising. So I'll go down that path.
Awesome. And we actually have a question from the Facebook. This is from Jake Clemmer. It's, what Plum Dragon products would you recommend for a contact sport athlete? For example, football, lacrosse, or rugby?
So it's interesting because from the martial arts world, always the questions come in and people are like, they're like, well, I train Wing Chun.
Mm-hmm.
What formula should I use, right? Or I train, Xing Yi, or I train MMA or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that detail is not as important. The part that's most important about Jake's question is he says contact sports, right? Mm-hmm. And so when I see football, lacrosse, rugby, like the thing is like you're getting hit hard, right? And so what you want to look at is what do your injuries look like, right? And so if you're getting hit hard and like, the dude comes in with his helmet in the football and he slams his helmet into like the side of your stomach, and your ribs, probably what you're experiencing there is a lot of bruising, right? So the bruising is going to be bruise juice, right?
Right.
If you get hit in the side and you feel like achy inside, that's going to be more ancestors. But what I would recommend for what Jake is talking about is he's going to be alternating between Ho family and Bruise. And if he's feeling achy, probably the Ho family is good. And if there's tons of bruising, then probably the Bruise juice is best. And those are probably going to be the two products that you're going to cling to. And it's likely that you'll use some of them and you'll feel like the Bruise, like for example, if you get hit hard in the elbow and you use the Bruise juice, you might find that it doesn't reduce the tightness, the tension. It doesn't go away. It feels like it's still really tight. You throw some Ho family on there and it gets, it all of a sudden you've got this range of motion and it feels nice again. And then the opposite happens for the bruising. But one of those two formulas for sure you'll cling to a little bit more than the other, depending on the nature of the injury, those two injuries, whether it's more bruising or the impact that makes you sore inside.
Thank you. That's awesome. I know. I wish I knew about Plum Dragon in high school because I grew up in lacrosse and rugby, and halfway through the lacrosse season, my arm would just be one big bruise. And so thinking about just being able to know about bruise juice and all that, I wish I knew sooner. And so here's another question based on, the athlete. So what if that same athlete or any older athlete has an old injury that is not healed or hasn't healed properly?
Okay, so this is where something like Ancestors becomes more useful. When injuries don't heal, like when they become chronic, that tends to be like kind of what in a lot of cases what they might consider in TCM to be more of a deficiency, right? Like initially it's an excess because you've got like excess swelling or you've got excess like accumulation, right? Like when bike riders fall and they get like edema, right? So there's excess water, there's excess blood, like, swollenness, excess heat. But as injuries heal and you don't address them, sometimes they turn into this kind of deficiency and your body like kind of, I don't know, maybe it gives up. It's like, well, I just can't get this all done. So it's just going to sit and linger. So something like Ancestors, which has a number of not just wind damp herbs, but also yang tonics in it, like things that are going to help rebuild that, become much, much more useful. And so Ancestors is going to be a big one. Like the iron palm jows, even though they're designed for iron palm, they tend to be more useful for for older injuries like that than something like an injury liniment. Now, injury liniments still work. I mean, you could take a basic Bruise Jow and you could probably use it for everything, and it'll probably work pretty well. But Ancestors becomes real important there. The other thing is internally, you know, a little bit of Great Mender to get things moving, and then a little bit of Gecko Tonic to help the body be able to have the constitution to do that healing. Can be really important as well.
Awesome. And you know, and Jake, you know, thank you again for your question. And I think, you know, overall, one of the big themes of today is, you know, our products can help a wide variety of issues. So it's which can help this specific issue the best, rather than just, you know, what can help this specific issue. So to get back onto where we were with the Bruise Juice, Ancestors, Advanced, and Ho family, what are the best uses for Bruise Juice?
So Bruise Juice is like best example is hardcore bruising. And we actually had a long time ago, there was I had a series of pictures of somebody who like their entire thigh was like covered in black and blue. And there was Bruise Juice used on it. And like over the course of like literally like 4 days, the bruising was what you could barely tell there was any bruising left. It still needed healing. Like the muscle was still damaged, like the vessels were still damaged and stuff needed to be healed in there, but the bruising was gone. And so like, when you think about, you know, on the last question, you think about the old injury, the old injury is like, well, there was some stagnation in there that never really like probably got pushed out, right? Causing some issues. And so like what's really nice where the Bruise Juice like becomes very specifically useful is that it makes sure like there might be healing to do, but it makes sure that like you've flushed out everything. Like it's all flushed out. Now it just needs to heal. And then you don't run into like issues with long-term injuries. That's where the Bruise Juice is really, really handy, is stuff like that.
Awesome. And I know one thing that, you know, customers say is that Bruise Juice works great for inflammatory arthritis, where there's visible swelling. Right.
So it's interesting because when we talk about arthritis and rheumatism and you know, joint pain in general, there are, and this is where TCM ends up being really powerful, because like if in the US, like basically it's like, well, you have joint pain. So it's like, it's either arthritis or it's rheumatism, right? Like that's almost like what it boils down to. But in Chinese medicine, it's like, well, the pain in your joint, like that's just the symptom, right? Like that's the branch. Like if we're going to treat the root of the problem, we say, well, is it due to heat? Is it due to cold? Is it due to excess? Is it due to deficiency? What's the underlying reason it's there? And let's treat the underlying reason in addition to treating the, you know, the symptom to make the patient feel better.
Right.
In that particular case, you know, we find that it becomes really useful to match that up. And so when people use Bruise Juice on joints that are painful and they're experiencing a benefit there, the reason that works is not because Bruise Juice is good for the joints. It's because there's some kind of inflammation in there, and the Bruise Juice is cooling and it's helping deal with that inflammation. And of course, it also brings blood to the area. And in almost every single case, blood is like the stuff that makes everything better.
Oh, yeah. Oh, definitely.
So that's why it works there. And that's why Ancestors, which is geared more towards the joints, is also a really good option where people are using Bruise Juice for their joint pain.
No, that's great. Thank you. And now let's talk a little bit about Ancestors Advanced. So what are the best uses for this formula?
So Ancestors through and through is like a really kind of a unique iron palm jow. And so to kind of expand on how that matters to people that don't do iron palm training, in iron palm, the goal here is that we're like strengthening our hands and our joints. And actually for me, iron palm is really about the power generation. I don't care how, but the thing is that part of that process is that you're smacking your hand, and to get real progress, you have to smack your hand enough that you would injure it without the jow.
Mm-hmm.
And so the iron palm jow is doing two things. It's doing, first of all, it allows your hands to heal properly, right? And when I say hands, I mean like the joints, right? The sinews and the bone and all that stuff. But then the second thing it does is it helps strengthen that stuff. Like we were talking earlier about how bone is kind of spongy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're like, you're putting some kind of pressure on your bone that helps it grow denser. But then the liniment also helps support that process and like internal stuff as well. And so that's where Ancestors is very useful for people that don't care about iron palm.
Right.
It's kind of looking at that use case that I use it to heal my joints, but especially I use it to like help strengthen them. And it's really, really useful for that type of thing, especially when there's some kind of, when you're like when you have some kind of activity that you're doing with that at the same time.
No, awesome. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you for doing this Q&A. I think we got a whole lot of great information from this. So I just have a few things in closing. So with the holidays coming up, and specifically Black Friday and Cyber Monday, we are doing a few different sales. So be sure to subscribe to our mailing list. You can get that on our website at www.plumdragonherbs.com. We're offering a lot of special once-a-year deals on Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So be sure to subscribe to take advantage of that. But once again, Josh, seriously, thank you so much. Yeah. I really enjoyed it. It's always super knowledgeable when we get to talk with you.
Yeah, I love it. I guess I like to talk. So I love it. I always enjoy it. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much, and have a great rest of your Saturday.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
Thanks for everything, you guys. Thanks for everybody. Enjoy.
Have a great one.
You too.